All right, let's talk about quadrilaterals. When we talk about quadrilaterals, remember a quadrilateral is any polygon that has specifically 4 sides. So that's what we're looking for, a shape with 4 sides. Now remember, in order for it to be a polygon, that has to be a closed figure. So 4 sides that connect to form a closed figure. Now, the sum of all the angles of a quadrilateral will always equal 360 degrees. That will never change. Now, we do have lots of different types of quadrilaterals that we're going to look at today that have specific characteristics that make them different from just any old regular quadrilateral. We're going to start with the trapezoid. So what's special about a trapezoid is a quadrilateral that only has one pair of parallel sides. So quadrilaterals look a little something, a typical quadrilateral, like this, where remember the word parallel means I have 2 sides that will never meet, they'll never intersect. So the top and the bottom are my pair of parallel sides, because if I were to extend them, they'll just keep going horizontally forever. But my other sides, those would eventually meet if I kept extending them up there at the top. So that's why I have one pair of parallel sides. I can also have a quadrilateral that looks like this. Okay, so again, my 2 pairs of parallel sides, this time are running vertically. So if I were to extend them, they would never meet. My other sides, my ones that are running kind of horizontally, if I kept extending them, they would eventually cross. So a trapezoid has one pair of parallel sides. Then another type of quadrilateral that we have is something called a parallelogram. And what's special about a parallelogram is it has 2 pairs of parallel sides. So that's how it's different from a trapezoid. Trapezoids have 1, parallelograms have 2. And then those opposite parallel sides are congruent. So I could have a parallelogram that looks like this. Okay, again, I've got 2 pairs of parallel sides, and the opposite sides are congruent. So those sides are congruent, and these 2 parallel sides are congruent as well. So then another type of quadrilateral I can have is called a rectangle. And we know lots about rectangles. Y'all have learned about rectangles forever, but let's add that good 5th grade vocab to it. So a rectangle has 2 pairs of parallel sides, just like a parallelogram. The opposite parallel sides are congruent. Again, just like a parallelogram. But what makes a rectangle different from just any old regular parallelogram is that a rectangle has 4 right angles. So my rectangle, again, I've got my 2 parallel sides. My opposite parallel sides are congruent. And I've got those 4 right angles. And remember, we use that square to show they are a right angle. So a rectangle, because it has 2 pairs of parallel sides and those opposite parallel sides are congruent, we can also call a rectangle a parallelogram because they have those in common. But again, it gets special because it has 4 right angles. Then we have something called a rhombus. A rhombus has 2 pairs of parallel sides, again, just like a parallelogram does. But what's special about a rhombus that makes it different from a parallelogram, different from a rectangle, is that a rhombus has 4 congruent sides. So a rhombus might look a little something like this. Okay, again, all 4 sides are congruent, and I've got those 2 pairs of parallel sides. So again, a rhombus, we can also consider it a parallelogram just because of those 2 pairs. And then last but not least, we have a square. So a square has 2 pairs of parallel sides, just like a parallelogram. But what makes it different from just any old parallelogram, any rectangle, any rhombus, is that a square has 4 congruent sides, and it has 4 congruent angles. So a square is going to look like this, 4 congruent sides. And since it's 4 congruent angles and a square, those are all right angles. And then one more good vocab word for us to know is we've talked a lot about the word parallel, which means I've got sides that will never meet. But then we also have a vocab word perpendicular, which means that I have two lines that will intersect, but they're also going to form a right angle when they intersect. So here are my two lines, they intersect and they form a right angle. So let's look at how we can organize all of our quadrilaterals based on their characteristics. So again, we know a quadrilateral is a polygon with four sides. Okay, so any shape with four sides, we can call it a quadrilateral. And when I look at this organizational chart, I kind of call this the quadrilateral sea. Okay, like here's all the waters, all the quadrilaterals, and then we have all these different islands that are part of the quadrilateral sea. So you've got an island that's over here by itself. This is our trapezoid island. Okay, and remember what makes a trapezoid special is that it only has one pair of parallel sides. It's still considered a quadrilateral because there are four sides, but then we can specifically call it a trapezoid because of that one pair of parallel sides. And trapezoid island exists all by itself because all of the other shapes that we talked about just a second ago are called parallelograms. Again, a parallelogram is a quadrilateral because it's got four sides, but what makes a parallelogram special is that it has two pairs of parallel sides. And then inside of parallelogram island, we've got three other kind of figures, landforms, whatever the heck you want to call them here. The first one that we had was rectangles. Okay, and we said that we can call a rectangle a parallelogram because it has those two pairs of parallel sides. But what makes it specifically a rectangle is that there are four right angles. Okay, so every rectangle is considered a parallelogram, again, because every rectangle has two pairs of parallel sides. But not every parallelogram is a rectangle because not every parallelogram has those four right angles. So that was one specific type of parallelogram. The other type of parallelogram that we talked about was a rhombus. Okay, so again, a rhombus, it has those two pairs of parallel sides, which is why we can call it a parallelogram. But what specifically makes it a rhombus is that there are four congruent sides. Okay, so again, every rhombus we talk about is considered a parallelogram because that rhombus has two pairs of parallel sides. But not every parallelogram is a rhombus because not every parallelogram has four congruent sides. And then the last parallelogram we talked about is a square. Now, a square has two pairs of parallel sides. It has four congruent angles, and it has, four congruent sides, and it has four right angles. So it has all the characteristics. So every square we talk about is considered a rhombus. Every square we talk about is considered a rectangle. And every square we talk about is considered a parallelogram and a quadrilateral because it has all of the characteristics of each of these shapes. But not every rhombus we talk about is a square because a rhombus does not have four right angles. Every rectangle we talk about is not a square because if it's a rectangle, it doesn't have those four congruent sides. But a square is a rectangle because it has those four right angles and it has the two pairs of parallel sides. Okay, so this is one way to organize it. Here is another way that we can look at organizing, just different types of graphic organizers. Up here at the top, we have our quadrilaterals. Now again, a quadrilateral is just a shape, a closed polygon with four sides. One branch of our quadrilateral are trapezoids. Trapezoids have one pair of parallel sides, and they'll show sometimes parallel sides using these arrows like this that are on the two parallel sides. Now, if it's not a trapezoid, that means it has to be a parallelogram. Now, parallelograms have two pairs of parallel sides. Now, it can be just a parallelogram, or it can also be a rectangle. because rectangles have 2 pairs of parallel sides, but rectangles also have 4 right angles. And if it's not just a parallelogram and it's not a rectangle, then it might be a rhombus, because a rhombus has 2 pairs of parallel sides, but all of its sides are congruent. And if it's not just a parallelogram, it's not a rhombus, it's not a rectangle, it might be a square. Because a square has 4 right angles, just like our rectangle. It has 4 congruent sides, just like our rhombus, and it has 2 pairs of parallel sides, just like our parallelogram.